Everybody smile for the screenshot. All right, welcome to the latest episode. Dave, Ruthi, and Alex here. We are going to lend our voices to one of the most controversial topics in the SEO world of a certain, company size. Do you, A, have one primary domain that uses subdomains, or B, does subfoldering for your international expansion? And
or
go.
C, separate websites.
That
or
one too.
subdomains.
Or separate websites with separate subdomains and subfolders. Go.
And you can do that one too.
All of the above.
All right. Do you want me to kick off?
Yes.
Why can't we subfolder?
You can subfolder. That is an option. Basically, it's a branding question. It's a marketing budget question. There's an IT side to it as well, and a domain availability side to it. So I'll try to get through some of those. So the first one, basically from a branding standpoint, if you had your own separate domain, there's a pretty good study for Canadians as well as people in the Czech Republic that they will scroll through results until they find a .ca, or in Czech terms, .cz.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Canada reason, there's a little bit more information on that study. And basically the information was they're tired of getting excited about a product, going through the entire process and saying, we don't ship to Canada. So they'll scroll through the .coms because they assume that's a US site until they find a .ca, basically.
Wow.
So that's the domain standpoint. So depending if you're e-commerce and shipping, that applies. If you're not e-commerce and shipping, it doesn't apply. You could be using an English language site for both, but you'd want to include French if you really wanted to go with the whole Canadian market, or be, legal in Canada and hit that market.
Legally required to, like that.
Yeah, if you want to hit that market like specifically, or if you just want to try to track that market, you could stick with English because that's the majority of the Canadian market is going to be English speaking. But once you start to market to them, again, this is kind of that marketing branding piece kind of kicks in, and Dave's absolutely right. Then you have a legal obligation to have French as well. Right. But just know that it's not that big of an audience. But if you're going to go French and English, there's a couple other countries as well that do speak French and English. It's going to be slightly different uses of terms, accents, some spelling differences. Mm-hmm. But there's a good chance you'll still rank. So even if your spelling is a little bit different color with an extra U versus not, stuff like that, you'll probably still do fine. So a branding budget kind of a question basically is, do we want to have a Canadian site and a .ca and a .com for maybe a flagship site? Because you can also take a look at Google. This is just a quick kind of aside, but it's a really important aside when we start talking about this stuff. Google has a list of generic CCTLDs. So a CCTLD, a country code top level domain, would be like .co.uk. So that's a country code, or .nz for New Zealand. There is a list that Google says these are considered generic. So there's a whole list of those, like .co Colombia, which has been used so frequently as company that they don't consider it Colombia anymore. It's just another .com, basically. So that's a generic CCTLD. So once you start hitting that list, and it depends if your market is on that list or your audience is on that list, then you have even more problems trying to basically distinguish yourself away from the generic global ones that might just be in the market versus ones who are actually trying to hit that market specifically. A couple more little fun pieces. Depending from your IT group, if they're savvy enough, they probably could launch the same foldering and all the rest underneath a whole giant list of domains, and it would just be fine. Most agencies, most companies, they'd be setting up basically a whole separate website, 5 times, 10 times, 11 times, something like that. So if you want to push an update 5 times, 10 times, however times, you got to do that. So that's a little painful. There's also, of course, domain availability. I mean, that's a pretty easy one. If you're in an enterprise organization, there's a chance you could go through, there's a couple of different domain companies out there. So you can do purchasing of domains, and they'll basically pitch that owner and try to buy it from them and stuff like that. So you don't have to do that yourself. There are companies that handle that kind of stuff. But that's a pretty big piece, because from a branding standpoint, I mean, I can think of a number of big companies who have really weird international domains. I'm going to just use Coca-Cola just out of this assumption that they don't have all the domains. I'm sure they do, but they might have coca-cola.co.uk, and then it's coke.kr, somebody else. I mean, and then it's, maybe Coca-Cola as one word for the US. I mean, they're going to have like a variety there. And then on top of that, from a cost standpoint, I know one big company who definitely got hit with a lot of costs, because if you want to have all the variations of all these different domains, that can add up to a lot of money. And then we can talk about domaining in a bit, but it's also like, think of defensive stuff. So if, your company is terrible.com, if you want to buy up all those in all these different languages and all these different .com, .org, .co, all the rest of those. Brand
Perfect
names.
example, walmartsucks.com, or people.
There's a bunch of them actually that you can find that, Microsoft was kind of legendary for having tons of them that were just, Microsoft is terrible and stuff like that. It would redirect back to Microsoft. We were like, oh my gosh, it's connected. It's like, yeah, it's defensive, but it's PR.
Now, hang on. We've covered like a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, and I need to go back.
Yeah, big topic.
Yeah.
Your one defense against not foldering all the languages is that Canada and the Czech Republic don't like it.
No. So that's a good part with e-commerce and shipping, basically, when you kind of get into that concept.
Yeah.
And those are the only two studies I know of. And
sure,
that's a really pretty niche topic. So I can't imagine there's going to be a whole lot more, but it's still going to apply.
I do think it helps to narrow it a little bit, let's just pick e-commerce for this conversation's sake. And if anybody wants a conversation on a specific other go-to-market model, let us know. We'll do another episode. But I think the shipping piece, you brought that in. That is huge, because then that impacts the whole rest of your organization in terms of calculating taxes and doing, everything on the up and up with legal and, going into those different markets. But then, yeah.
So here, maybe if I could, here's where my thoughts are, right? So if you're a large global enterprise company and you have a presence in a wide variety of countries, you have a couple of different approaches, and it's going to depend greatly on whether or not you sell directly to people, or you have more of an ABM model, company's marketing model, where you want to get folks to talk to people in your organization. Yep. If you're shipping, it's really important that you have a separate site, be that a subdomain, a specific domain, or a folder that is dedicated per country. Because if somebody is in Algeria, right, they're going to need their language and probably French, but they also need to know that your products are going to ship to Algeria. On the other hand, if you're more of an ABM type company, or, your main goal of your website is information and to get somebody to contact your sales rep, it might be more cost effective for you to just have a French version of your site that has the right information and then allows you to contact, at which point a foldering structure might make more sense to you.
And I do think this is where, again, if you're an SEO in these kind of big enterprise things, you don't get to make the decision of what the strategy should be, right? You're going to be jerry-rigging whatever the other one was, if there was one to begin with, right? And that's where I think the subdomain piece of it for the transactions makes a lot of sense. Because then you can have that informational piece be standardized, to your point, Ruthi, where you really only need one language version of, these are the things that we're good at, and this is why you should trust us, and here's our solutions, and, all that marketing speak. But then if you find yourself having different products in different countries, right? Maybe your portfolio is not the same in each country. There are some advantages of having that second subdomain. Now, in terms of ranking factors, that's where it gets. That's where I want to kick it off to Alex, because I see him smirking.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. We've got folders, got subdomains, and then we're talking, I'm talking about separate domains. And I have to say, just to be frank, all of those different techniques can work. They all take different amounts of effort. And they also take a different business strategy behind each one of them, because it's a question of how far are you going with each one of those? Are you going to have an EN, so general English folder, general FR French folder, or are you going to try to go after each one of these countries? So yeah, Dave, my smirk is because we're talking a lot about the enterprise factors, but we're kind of glossing over one of the major ones, which is really an SEO factor. So what are we building up, and what is basically going to have a good chance of ranking? And that's really, I think, where the rubber hits the road in terms of, are we going to really put money and effort behind unique copy between French France and French Algeria? Or are we just going to have the exact same copy in both? Are we going to really go after that market and build up an FR domain? And do we really want that one to rank, next to our global domain, if we have a global domain, or next to our headquarter domain, whatever the other one is? Or we just really want to build up the single domain and have it try to rank for all these different areas as well. That's where I think a lot of the ranking discussion kind of kicks in, because we're talking about, in some cases, like a backlink profile. You're going to build up a whole profile with a brand new site. But if you have a folder and then eventually buy a brand new domain, brand new domain, and then just redirect everything under that thing, it doesn't have that link kind of background to it. So the odds of it ranking against its local market is lower. If you had spent 10 years, building up, or, some decent capital, marketing budget and PR budget behind some domain, you could probably do just, that one would do really well. So there is that kind of big piece of, what are you willing to kind of put effort behind, and how far ahead do you want to think in terms of the company's expansion, knowing that you're basically setting yourself up for a heck of a lot more effort, and you're just building for the long term. So, and Ruthi,
which one are you putting more effort around?
Which one? It would be domains. If you had separate domains, you'd be putting more effort in, as well as like maintaining the site, but also building up that site and really doing unique things with that site versus that's the whole FR. So French Canada versus France French. You have two different, a .ca and a .fr. And you got two domains.
Yep.
You're going to put effort behind building up unique copy on both.
Yep.
So because they're going to naturally compete with each other, you're going to be building up PR for both, trying to get the local French news and French organizations to link just to that French one, and then the local Canadian ones to link to that Canadian ones, to build up that profile again, so that they have better competition locally in their local markets. I mean, that's the personalization of Google and personalization of search engines. It's no longer like this global landscape where you're kind of competing against everybody. You're really competing against what Google believes is your set and where you are. So your location, your history, your IP address, a lot of kind of factors play into that. So now you're really looking at kind of a local market thing of where do we want to have a presence, and what are we really willing to put the effort behind? Because having just a blank folder that's going to contain everything FR, and we're going to hit basically any country that happens to speak French all at once, that might work if you're in a niche market, if you're in a market where there's not a whole lot of big competitors out there. If you're the only copy, yes, you'll do just fine. I would really want to make, from a user standpoint, at least clear on the page of, this is for all these different countries. And yes, we do, service these different countries or something like that, and have some kind of page at least, or contact us that, speaks to that. Yeah, that's where I see the difficulty of. I commonly pitch the separate domain piece, because I'm trying to basically push the company to make that decision of, where do we really want to put money?
Right.
And what are we willing to put money behind? Because it's okay to have a folder and a separate domain structure too. You could mix and match this stuff too.
And this is why this topic is absolutely fascinating to me, because it's a perfect example of where what most in the business will just assume is a throwaway SEO. We'll just go do your, SEO fairy dust stuff. Exactly. Yeah, SEO it and be done with it so we can check the box. No, you can't. This is a legitimate business strategy decision where if you are going to have a separate domain, now do we start having conversations about hiring someone locally? Right. And do you build out an office, or do you do, what's your work from home policy so that we can attract talent in these local things to be able to do the web strategy that we're going for? It's not just about launch the website. You also have to maintain it. You also have to have the infrastructure behind it in order for it to be successful. Now, if I can be the pain in the ass and, quote most senior leaders, why would I do that when everybody just goes to Amazon for products anyway?
I have a website, man. What's the point?
Because you don't sell SAP on Amazon. Like, there's different business models. And with our huge enterprise companies, right, we might have multiple business models within one enterprise. Yeah. So sure, a portion of your products go to Amazon and make sure you're optimized for search on Amazon. That's important. But on the flip side, right, contact customer support or contact our sales rep. That's not living on Amazon.
And always remember, have the most friends on Friendster and MySpace, because that's a long-term, method. Whenever we tie ourselves to a third-party site and pitch hitch our way into that thing, and when it goes down in flames, oh wait, we should have been a little bit more broad, and maybe also from a first-party data standpoint, figure out who our customers are instead of telling Amazon, go ahead, know the data, just send me the check.
Yep.
But I think we come back to this a lot, and we'll continue to coming back to this a lot, because what you do with a lot of your SEO strategy comes back to your business strategy and what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
And honestly, having an individualized country site for all the countries you're in is just not feasible a lot of the time. You might have 6 where that's possible, and the rest of them, it's like, well, make sure you've got the information, because you might not have the boots on the ground to be able to answer the support questions, let alone create that customized content. And that's where I get, a little bit nervous about saying, let's have a domain for every single country, because now all of a sudden the amount of things that you have to maintain is massive, especially if you have to maintain them individually versus a site that you can push updates to can be a lot more scalable.
Mm-hmm. One of the more interesting case studies in global expansion, and I'll see if I can find it for the show notes, but Coca-Cola during World War II. So if you guys aren't familiar with that,
no, please. No.
So I'm gonna get the details wrong because it's been a while since I've read it. But the gist of it essentially was, in order to support the American troops, they had built out these logistical pipelines, right? So that the troops could enjoy a Coke in Italy while we're, taking it back. But then post-war, now all of a sudden you have this infrastructure. So you're in all these markets, and, what do the soldiers do when they come across, the locals who are having a hard time? You give them a Hershey bar, you give them a Coke, right? So then you develop the product, knowledge and tastes and whatever else in an awful environment, but it establishes a foothold in the countries. And then you have the infrastructure and you have the support and whatever else. So
Dave's view of the world, infrastructure first. Then customers.
Well, I bring that up because you need to support what you're going to do, right? Like, I think it's one of those things where we like to kid ourselves with digital that you can just do everything and you don't have to have boots on the ground and you don't have to go do the FaceTime and you don't have to have the connections, right? You can just launch a website and sit back and collect 7-8 figures a year. No, you have to do business right. You have to have the relationships. You have to have the support there. You have to be willing to if something goes wrong, are you willing to jump on a plane to troubleshoot it the next day? Right? Like that's, those are considerations if you're looking to expand globally, right? I mean, that's just part of the game,
There's one other element too of if you're in an organization that has a giant brand. I'm thinking, for instance, I think Nike does foldering, if I remember correctly. And quite frankly, Nike can do probably whatever they want to do.
Right.
There's some element there too of if you're with a really, really, well-known heavy brand, kind of large organization like Coca-Cola or Hershey or, Nike, you could probably get away with just about any method. And you'll still get the links because you still get the local news and you'll still get the local business, that's still already in place. So supporting an infrastructure that exists is a heck of a lot easier than trying to build it out for the first time.
Right. And I think I said this in one of the previous episodes too, but one of the things that I was shocked about when I took my first enterprise role coming from the agency side was just how much being in a known brand allowed you to have a whole bunch of bad, it covered up for a lot of sins, basically. Yeah. You could do some really awful things in terms of like SEO best practices and still rank in the top 10 without really trying, just because of, everybody knows, likes, and trusts you. You're already established your authority in the space. You've already, been a known entity to a lot of these, people and robots. So it just makes it a lot easier. So
to emphasize one other point, we brought it up kind of briefly, but there's a couple other sides to it as well, just about the legal side of things. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about first party data. So GDPR, there's some new laws coming in the US. And of course, may affect anybody who's digital because it's being done at the state level, but you're pretty impossible to kind of say that you're not there. So California is passing one, New Jersey has one. There's a couple other ones that are kind of GDPR-ish clones. So your cookie policy, your data retention policy, your data deletion and user deletion kind of policies, those have to change. We mentioned about the language requirements, potentially depending on what country you're in. Do you need to support a language that even if it's not as popular, one that you don't want to spend the time and money translating, you still have to because you're hitting that market. And what level are you hitting that market where you legally have to do that? Can you just have a .com and just happen to get Canadian traffic? Well, then you don't have to abide by that. But if you're trying to hit the market directly, there's a line there. So I don't know that line and where that line is.
Yeah, consult your lawyer.
That's a huge call out because, if you're working in a regulated industry, let's say
medical,
you're working in healthcare, for example, medical, it's huge. I mean, you cannot say some things in one country and then you can in another country. In another country, the rules are totally different. And the images you display are completely different. So it depends.
Claims, even certain topics are taboo in certain countries, which are like, you would think of common topics that you don't think are actually taboo. And there's laws against even mentioning it on your website or advertising using those terms. We mentioned briefly some of the staffing, but there's even staffing implications too. For instance, if you want to be in China, you need a Chinese domain that is tied to basically local address, and you need employees and staff there who are going to be maintaining the website. So you might have to end up with a whole subsidiary or new organization or some sort of relationship. I'm not sure if you can do an agency relationship, but some sort of relationship there where you actually have staff there. That's a massive country. I mean, you could do, there's Mandarin and then there's other languages as well. And that's the other oversimplification that happens pretty frequently. Like India is soon going to be the most populated country. There's a lot of languages in India. Yes. Which markets are you trying to hit? Which markets are, one, have access to, for instance, high-speed internet connection. Mm-hmm. Those are available markets. I mean, there's a lot of qualifications there.
Well, an interesting thing about India is that, to your point, there are enough people in India that it skews the global top searches on, Google's report out every year.
Gosh, every year.
Because it's like, oh, this cricket match happened in August, and everybody in India was searching for it. So those are the top 5 terms, and then then there's everyone else.
There's e-marketers.
Good on you. Yeah. But
e-marketers,
beware of averages.
Some fantastic analysts at eMarketer, and they had brought that up once, and they were so shocked because they were quizzing their guests of, what do you think was the top things searched? And it was COVID years, so there's some terms related to that, and a lot of local news to that particular country, UK, US, that kind of stuff. And no, it's cricket matches. That's because the Indian market loves cricket. I mean,
it's a good reality check, right? This is what the world is searching for.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Data gets skewed so quickly that just a small tangent on that, but just one that always kind of frustrates me is whenever we look at U.S.-based reporting, and it was like, oh my gosh, California, New York, Texas, they really love us, and it's like, name the 3 most populated states. Right. Okay, you just did. That doesn't mean market penetration.
I remember having a conversation one time where they're like, okay, give us the top 15 economies and that'll be our target. I said, okay, so what's your California and Texas strategy as opposed to these other countries?
Right.
Like, what do you mean?
Well,
they're huge. So if you want the top 15 global economies, then Texas and California need to have their own strategies, especially if you're talking about, your average Californian and your average Texan. You talk to them very differently. Those are totally different audiences,
Very different.
Yeah, that's a really good point too about how finite those languages can get too. Especially, bring it specifically to an SEO standpoint. Healthcare is one really unique one where common diseases have different names in Florida, Minnesota versus California. Whether or not they use a particular acronym or not, or a slightly different acronym for some of the longer named diseases types. That's the same thing. That's a regional thing. There's a lot of regional lines there that don't seem like there will be, but once you get into it, there definitely are. There's those lines.
Well, do you know time machines exist?
Tell us more, Dave.
That is the regionally specific name in southeastern Wisconsin for an ATM.
That's
because
amazing.
Time was a particular brand of ATM for a certain period, so that people just started calling them time machines. So I'm gonna go to the time machine and get some cash. Like, oh, yeah, you do that. You do that. Come back to me and let me know.
Search trends around time machines in Wisconsin, right? Because that's if you're U.S. Bank, that's part of your local banking strategy. You need to make sure when somebody in Wisconsin is searching time machine, they find your ATM.
Potentially. Yeah, it's the same. Those kind of regional things I find fascinating. Like as somebody who studied writing and has an interest in language, bubbler is another one. For a drinking fountain, water fountain. So there's all those kind of nuances. But again, I'm sure there's somebody listening to this going, yeah, but with the natural language stuff, it just gets rolled up into the bubble. And you're like, yeah, you're probably right. But it's important to know these nuances if you're going to address the audience properly, right?
Yeah. Right.
Especially if you're going to kick them off to a salesperson, you need to come off as genuine,
you need to establish that trust.
Right? Yeah. So
I was thinking about your comment, Alex, about healthcare, and another one that popped to mind was the difference in gating restrictions. So let's say you have an English site. Well, that works for some of the English-speaking world, but if you're in Australia, a lot of your medical content has to be gated. Because you can't talk to the general public. You have to be talking to healthcare professionals in particular.
Yeah. There's lines all over there. Plus, to the language point, Dave, too, about entities, basically, that you would have the idea that all those different terms would wrap up in one entity, and if Google will just figure it out. That's not the case currently in 2023. There was a study recently that was done. It was a UK clothing company who basically took a copy of their UK site and basically got a .com domain, threw it in there, and wasn't doing great, but they decided to do a test on it, and they changed trainers to tennis shoes and trousers to pants, stuff like that. And their traffic shot up. So you think it would all be tied together, and it should be all tied together. But if you're the US and you're searching for tennis shoes, you're not looking for a personal trainer.
Right.
I mean, then there's lines there on a local level too, where the same term gets changed. If someone says, I'm going to go get a trainer, it's like, okay, it's like, what gym do you go to?
Exactly. Or a jumper.
Right.
If you're in the UK, that's another word for a sweater.
Right. Yeah. Interesting little lines there too. And Dave, just kind of throwing it back to you too about speaking to that local market, and then how closely do you need your language to really get those people to think that, yes, this content is meant for me. This is a company who understands my needs and my pain points. And, how much can you basically kind of push up against that? And it probably depends on your market too. If you're the only player in the market, they're probably more willing to go out on a limb and, work with you. But what's your advice in terms of the UK English spellings, American English spellings? If you're just talking English market only, what would be your idea on that one?
Well, again, ever classic marketing professional, it depends.
That's any professional.
I think the companies where it would really matter, I think, go to your brand, right? Like if you're selling some high-end luxury good, the perception of the British as higher class in certain segments, right? That is a shortcut you can play to, right? It's a mental shortcut you can play to that people will latch onto. There will also be a certain segment that will absolutely push back against that. But that's part of your marketing, right? That's what we do. We segment the audience. I think if you're looking at like food, then it does matter, right? So the difference between chips and crisps, there's just a little bit more friction mentally if you're doing that kind of terminology between the countries. So it would make sense to, change that. But if you're speaking the same things and you have a couple, OURs or REs instead of, the American spelling, that's fine. If you're in probably that luxury market. Again, I think it does depend. I tend to go off of empathy for the customer and try to make it as simple as possible. So, at any point for, user experience or whatever else, if we can reduce the amount of friction or pain that somebody feels in their process, towards converting, I absolutely want to smooth that out, just because it's going to make it easier to upsell, to embed yourself in their mind as a company you want to do business with, or product you want to try. And that's where you differentiate yourself, right? If you do the hard work for your customer, you're just going to have an easier time getting more customers. Right?
If I put my finance hat on for a minute too, Dave, you've made the point a number of times in the past. There's essentially one country that speaks American English. Mm-hmm. Maybe parts of Canada, right? But there's a lot more countries that lean towards British English. Mm-hmm. And so you might have some fantastic budget considerations by not starting with American English.
Mm-hmm. I've been part of those discussions, and if you want to see something fun, lob the thought to a group of Americans that you should have British English as the English master, and watch their reactions. Personally, I think it's fun. But yeah.
Well, to take a little twist, and considering how many minutes we're in and it hasn't been mentioned yet, hreflang. So just throwing a little talk about hreflang, because somehow in enterprise SEO global discussion, we just got to it, but I want to make sure we don't gloss over it.
Well, I think that's fair, because the first question, I think, whenever anybody brings up hreflang is, did you get it to work?
Yeah. John Mueller has stated, I think on more than one occasion, that hreflang is the most complex and also most commonly done incorrectly, method of SEO. So by no means am I an expert in it. So first off, I would say Aleda Solis, ALEDYA SOLIS, Aleda Solis. She is a fantastic global SEO expert, and she has some really good guides on it, as well as some cool tools that allow you to put in a couple different URLs, say what you're trying to target, and I'll basically rewrite the hreflang copy for you, or code for you. So definitely worth looking into. There's also options with hreflang, including do you want to do an XML sitemap variation, which can work. It's difficult, but it can be a little bit easier to implement because you don't have to have page level access. It can be more scalable. Page level, that's totally possible too if you don't have access to edit all the files. That's a method as well. Your CMS also, of course, might have some tool or plugin or something like that as well. And then a quick shout out to HTML lang. So that's just straight HTML-lang. Bing uses that. A couple others use that. So you put that at the top of the page and say basically which one you're going after. But the other last piece, just to wrap this up with hreflang, that's just a common issue that a lot of people run into is, are you targeting languages? Are you targeting language and country? Because HTML lang was really kind of built for both. Is HTML for language and country. You're trying to make those variations. And it can help when you're doing that multi-domain strategy and you haven't really built up those other domains. You kind of get at least almost a kind of canonical linking method towards each other. So then there's still something basically connecting those pages together, as well as reducing that cross competition. Because if you're, for instance, searching in French, you end up with the France site where really you're Canadian. You wanted the Canadian site to show up first. HTML lang helps fix that. So just a long little piece on that, but just keep that in mind. That's a difficult strategy. And the Search Off the Record podcast from Google, from those kind of SEO spokespeople of John Mueller and the team, they have asked for the community's opinions and advice on a replacement method. Everyone knows it's not good. So this may change in the future.
Well, and part of it goes back to it's messy because it depends on what your strategy is, right? If you're going for a country-based strategy, then you've got to implement it. But if you've decided you just want a French version, that's a different story. And if you've got the mix, then all of a sudden it becomes much more complicated.
Yep. And tagging every page is difficult because you want to take, it's not a domain-wide tag either. It's a page-level tag. So this particular product, if it's available in this country, and this country, okay, we need a tag for those. And then this one doesn't have it. Well, now the tag isn't going to be all for 5 countries. Now it's only going to be for 3 or 4. Right. And then you do have to reference that own page in the tag. I mean, it's complex. It gets really complex really fast.
My first thought whenever anybody brings up href is, how often are you changing your pages?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because if you're going to be changing them and updating them with any kind of frequency, I would hesitate to recommend doing it.
Yeah, depending on if you're changing the kind of the intention of the page and the purpose of the page, or if you're doing constant product releases. I mean, there's an overhead standpoint to it as well, which, holy cow, that would be a painful company to work for. You definitely have to have like some CMS level kind of connection points. So you could say like this catalog is, this product is similar to these other products, and we need to put the tag in and implement it based on that or something.
Well, and God forbid your company doesn't do, an agile, thing, so that you
speed of that.
Don't even have the checklist of, okay, this is considered done because we've, updated the 40 pages that this, href points to.
Yes.
You know, I mean, if you had to update that every single time, forget it. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And
it can be worthwhile also to do partial implementations. So if you had the home pages all tagged to each other, the about us, something like that, some top level pages that are basically pretty static, at least that adds something.
Even just the catalog, right? Catalogs are oftentimes automated, and you've got the exact same pages across. That can be a much easier implementation than when you have a lot of different blog and sort of more informative content type pages, which are a little bit more mixed and probably vary more by country.
Okay, so under the guise that SEO is business strategy, if you had, let's just say you found $50,000 in the couch cushion, and you could spend that either link building in a particular locale or implementing hreflang, where would you put your money?
Oof, depends. I mean, I'm going to lean towards link building off the bat, but at the same time, I can see instances where if you've got a presence across all of Europe, the boundaries aren't so thick, right? And so that's a place where hreflang can make a huge difference, where maybe in some of your US, your Canada, less of an issue.
I'm in a similar boat, especially if, we should talk about link building in some episode, but if you're starting link building, that's a waste of $50,000. So there's so many, rules that you need to put in place if you're using external vendors, however you're doing that. It'd be tough to do that. hreflang can be really useful. But again, we're just talking about basically helping that kind of cross competition against our own sites that we own. Right. It's not necessarily a big, competitive advantage to basically doing this. It can be maybe in a local market that's, not very competitive, and you're able to basically dominate it by basically having that tag. That's possible.
Well, hang on. There's some cost savings, right? If you've got a lot of German speaking or German citizens, I suppose, contacting your Swiss help desk.
Yeah, there's cost.
They can't help, right? That's expensive to get those folks to the right place. And so there's use cases for it.
Yeah, it can be the cost of, hours that you're saving from cost center, how many calls you're saving. But yeah, even if you have a subsidiary set up, they might not even be transferring each other, those customers to each other. So that could be lost profit. Not just a cost thing, but a profit equation there too. So it's a tough one, Dave. What about you? What's your take?
Well, I hear what you guys are saying, and then I thought of a third option. So I'm going to call in the wild card.
Break the rules. Go for it.
Yep. Well, it's my own question. I get to do what I want. Well, I guess I'll pitch it back out to you. So if you're trying to get into a local market or, establish a better foothold in a market, I guess in my mind, the link building shorthand is always just right next door to PR.
Oh, yeah.
So for $50,000, I think you would get more return on your investment to hire a publicist than you would any of the digital things. To the point earlier of boots on the ground, shaking hands, establishing a presence, because people will trust what they've already been exposed to. Right?
Yep.
So, yeah, okay. That'll be my one wild card for a couple weeks, maybe.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. No, go ahead.
I was just saying there's so many options. If you had that amount of capital, it'd be also really tempting to just get outside of that and just say, we could do a paid search campaign for aisle or targeted. We're going to go just around this particular market or particular product set, maybe.
Right.
You could make $50,000 last a little while, depending on those factors. But that would be almost tempting to do too, because now you're just exposing local market that you've targeted to your product set directly to it. if you had decent landing pages or decent CRO going on, I mean, that can be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And a little boost can be a little boost, but word of mouth is also valuable too. So getting the product into the hands of the local market, that's useful.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So.
And I know we have some listeners who are going, 50 grand, man, if only I had 50 grand.
I know.
Amazing.
If you're finding that in your couch, let me know what couch you bought.
Yeah. See, what you really need to do with 50 grand is you find some podcasts that have something to do with your market. And you reach out to those podcasts. Yeah, exactly. You get sponsored. The micro influencers. That's where it's at, man. Forget the macro. Go for the micro.
Exactly.
And if you found an enterprise SEO podcast that, you really helped, you could buy them a coffee or a Jaguar. I mean, whatever, or either option. Yep. You could do those things too.
Well, that's actually a perfect teaser for an episode idea that, Alex had offline, which is, SEO is lonely. So maybe that'll be our Valentine's Day episode. And
that's a good idea. I like it.
Bravo.
So with the short amount of time, we did have a second topic we wanted to talk about. And actually, considering at the time of this recording, the landscape of, marketing news, I'm really proud of us for getting 47 minutes into recording and not bringing up AI.
Somebody brought up natural language processing earlier.
I did.
But
yes. It's SEO related.
Wasn't going to call names, but yeah.
Right. That's we tell the truth on this show, Ruthi. So don't hedge. No, but so who had the idea? It was AI and advertising, I believe, was the topic. So should we wax poetically for the next 10 minutes or so on that?
Sure.
I mean, hot take, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've already got Google optimizing a lot of our advertising experience.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we just pay Google to create our ads and outsource the whole process entirely? I mean, why do you need the middleman of somebody creating the ads just to enter them into Google when you can just have Google do it? Psst, moneymaker.
1, antitrust. 2, crap experiences in the past. Google, I'm sure you're trying to turn things around, but no offense to people who are just out of college, but there are some activities you probably shouldn't be doing. Massive ad accounts that need fine tuning is probably one of them. Build into that. At least get some time under your belt before you get in there. And that's, I was always the person that was really annoyed whenever people would say that to me, but now I get it now.
Yeah. I guess a couple of different points. One, there's more bots on the internet than humans. So there's always, or at least for a very long time, there's always been a credit system that basically Google would always do that. If they basically noticed bot traffic, they would credit your account some amount. And there's always been a lot of questions of, is this actually all of the bots? Because sometimes the numbers, or you look at your server logs and you're like, we're getting hit hard and we are not seeing the credits come in. And it's astounding because it's every single month there's more credits. So that's really frequent. Doesn't seem to matter what market you're in. So that's a dangerous thing. I mean, once we basically get to that level, because we're losing more transparency around the ad creation, the ad running, who's in charge of things and who can we basically who has an ability to affect things. And what you're suggesting, I think, is what Google's been moving towards anyways. I mean, you can put in a URL of your landing page and it can come up with ads for you. From the design standpoint, if you want to get into display and banner advertising, basically that side of it, Google is, display network. You can really easily now. The ads aren't great. And to Dave's point, a lot of the automated stuff, the automated recommendations I've seen out of Google ads have been awful, just really bad ideas. We would get more clicks from a really bad market that doesn't make any sense for this particular company to play in. And I think that's the human element that has to always come in, and maybe we can get to a point with AI and speaking of natural language processing, but basically those pieces tied together, that it can get a good understanding of what your company does and maybe ask you some questions of what markets you're going after, because it really does have to get down to that level to then, target correctly online and really be running the ads correctly. And saying like, this was an ad that really mattered, or we got a lot of conversions because we did optimize for conversions, but holy cow, the leads were crap. Like, they're not going to have that next stage of information. So they're going that way.
Yeah, and this is interesting thing for me, looking at the conversations around ChatGPT and that explosion, and like it's really cool to see what people are doing with it. Just testing out and experimenting and. I'm all for that. However, you get some people who are putting these examples out where it's like, look what I created. Nah, dude, you didn't create that. You came up with the idea, but that you didn't create that. You can't have ownership of that. And this is definitely a separate episode.
Dave's watching my reaction going, I'm poking some buttons.
Hold on here.
Hold on. Because I think that's what's amazing about some of this new technology is it says, all right, we're going to automate a lot of the generation part of your idea, right? Mm-hmm. You can start with an idea and then use these different tools to make it a reality. And the ownership there is squishy. It's unclear, right? It was, if I worked with the AI, I was the initiator. Maybe I do own it. Maybe I am the creator in a sense. Did I have a creative partner? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So not getting caught up on the one red herring.
You just threw it at her face though.
No, I know. And, enjoy that wet, slippery feeling. The thing about it, though, is a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing, one, you can create stuff with a huge amount of volume, which is cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
However, to Alex's point, without the knowledge of the audience that you're targeting, with their needs and wants and the regional, dialect things, all of the stuff that we've talked about before, you are going to have to A/B test the crap out of everything that you launch. And that's going to be such a long process to get to where you could if you had already known those things, right?
I don't know. I've seen a lot of crappy ad copy. I think you have to do that anyways. So the difference is just whether or not you're paying an agency to make a bunch of crappy ad copy or you're just having ChatGPT do it for you. Either way.
Right. There is a lot of crap marketing out there, and I will readily agree with you on that. However, again, I think I've said this, but every time we bring up AI or whatever else, I am 1,000% against lazy marketing because, it is a craft and I've put in time for that craft and I enjoy the craft and I hate to see other people just not, and that's probably my own thing to go over, but that's a different podcast. So we won't get into that therapy, but I honestly think that in order to automate the ads, right, go ahead and use ChatGPT. Cool. You saved a bunch of money on the front end, right, in terms of the creative and the whatever else. But how much money are you going to be spending afterwards to fine tune it? Whereas, if you already knew that audience, if you're doing something hyper local, right, you need to know that audience already, and then you can target it and go. Right.
Hot take, the way that these natural language processing AIs are evolving, I think in a not too distant future, they're going to be able to give me a much better version of a local language ad than I will, right? They're going to be able to say, this is how people in Australia seem to talk on the internet. So I'm going to mimic that with my ad in a much better way than myself or my agency based here in the United States is going to be able to do it. And that to me might be an advantage that picks up is those little nuances in language, the jumper versus the sweater.
Yes and no. I think we're 6 months away from the first really huge, mess up with the AI stuff, right? And it'll be fun to watch that plane.
There's already been 2, Alex.
Yeah,
there's already been
2. What you got?
Well, there was CNET basically. They had a bunch of articles. I think it was mostly like financial quarterly data, which again, this isn't ChatGPT, but it's structured data. So it's pretty easy to create analysis kind of based off of that, saying this quarter is better than the last quarter, stuff like that. So they had a disclaimer on their pages saying that it was written by AI, but it was human edited, something to that state. Right. They recently mentioned that they're going to pause that and review it because they got a lot of attention and they're kind of concerned about basically if that's going to tank those pages or not. And then bankrate.com would be worth one to look into after the podcast and kind of look at what they were doing. They're basically very, very public about AI created content, and then basically take a look at what kind of Google's response has been to it. Right. It's still a lot in the early stages where Google's trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, there was the new New York Times article recently talking about the founders of Google being brought back in basically to say, how do we deal with AI? The company really is a little bit at a loss of what to do. So, I mean, this is kind of the early stages, but you're going to quickly see, some pretty big, there's Google slaps and Google bans. I mean, if you think about like BMW and I can't remember if it was Kohl's or JCPenney, big brands, they got hit with some pretty significant Google, Google fines, which basically was just they got de-indexed or they got really pushed really far down in the index. So even before it kind of hits a legal standpoint, which I'm sure it will soon, that's going to happen too. Getting back to the question though, last minute or two, I still am going to bring up the phrase of "it depends" because I think we've all said it now.
Bingo card.
I think if you had like a straight e-commerce shop and you were just saying optimize for purchases, you probably could. You probably could run it pretty darn programmatically, and it would work out just fine. If you had a really complex sale, a really complex product, or something that was kind of a touchy subject or something like that, yeah, you'd have to have a lot more hands-on time. But if you just had a simple e-commerce store, you probably could just throw money at Google. The thing is, they'll probably broad match the heck out of it, and you'd still like waste a bunch of money that if you had a human, you could probably do it better. So,
and that's where the AI stuff around culturally sensitive topics. I mean, that's where I guess I'm more concerned, right? Because we know the internet is a dumpster fire when it comes to, that kind of stuff. So if a bot is being trained off of, what it finds off of that, then I get more worried. And when something blows up because of a culturally insensitive robot, I think it should. And, they should get their comeuppance. Because that's that kind of lazy marketing piece where it's like, whoa, you needed to think about if I launch this, the next steps could be blah, 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 blah. Now, this is also coming from me having, crisis management experience, and always pitching clients like, really, honestly, you could have saved yourself $300,000 if you took 5 minutes just to think. But instead, let me help you, right?
Soundbite. Take my 5 minutes just to think.
All right. So in the last segment, I liked this, as we're playing around with the show format, recommendations. We'll do a lightning round because we went a little long. So what caught your eye in the last week? Ruthi, you go.
Oh man, check out SAP.com's foldering structure for their different countries. It's beautiful.
I would check out Nike's XML sitemap because it's fun. There's an ASCII little logo there. There's a couple other ones. A couple other companies have done something like that. So do something fun as well as you're doing your global strategy. Throw in something fun in your XML sitemap that only other SEOs will care about.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do none of those. My stuff is completely non-work related. One of my favorite bands is Machine Head, and 3 years ago they basically live streamed their European tour. So I've been watching like each concert as they went through their European tour in 20 whatever.
That is both amazing and yes. I need the time to be able to do something like this.
Well, it's in the background while I'm doing other stuff, right? So it just, if you need a pick me up, put on a metal show and you just get that energy that helps you get through the 20,000th line of Excel.
Machine Head European tour.
Exactly, and it's really interesting to see the difference in how the crowds respond. Certain audiences definitely bring it more than others. So, yeah, that's fun. So check out live stream concerts from your favorite bands. It's a YouTube rabbit hole that's totally worth going down. So anyway, music. All right. Thank you for hanging around. I know we didn't come to a definitive conclusion on the subfoldering things, but we'll come back to it because it's a debate that will forever rage on. So it's fun to have. Take care, like, subscribe, share, follow, submit any questions in the comments or on the socials, and let us know. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.